The great warship floated in the darkness between stars, its metal body stretching for miles in every direction like a sleeping giant made of steel and death. This was the eternal silence, pride of the Vrethani Dominion, and today it would choose its next victim. Admiral Kethvor stood at the center of the command bridge, his forearms folded behind his back as he watched the holographic display spin slowly before him. His gray skin caught the blue light of distant stars, and his mandibles clicked together in a sound that his species made when they were pleased. "Show me the candidate worlds," he commanded, and his voice echoed through the bridge, where hundreds of officers worked at their stations. The display changed, and dozens of small planets appeared, each one tagged with information about its people, its resources, and its military power. The Vrethani had done this 4,000 times before, and they had perfected the art of choosing which worlds to consume. Pause. A younger officer approached the admiral with a tablet in his hands, his steps careful and respectful as he entered the presence of the most feared military commander in 3 galaxies. "Admiral, we have completed our survey of Sector 7, the officer said, keeping his eyes low. "There are 12 worlds with intelligent life, but our analysts recommend this one specifically." The display zoomed in on a small blue planet, orbiting an ordinary yellow star. It was beautiful in a simple way, with swirling white clouds and deep blue oceans that covered most of its surface. "Earth," the admiral read from the data streaming beside the image. "Population of 8 billion creatures called humans. They have basic space travel, but have only reached their nearest moon. Their weapons use chemical reactions and primitive nuclear technology." He made the clicking sound again, louder this time. "This is what you bring me?" he asked, and there was amusement in his voice rather than anger. "A world of children playing with fire?" "The resources are excellent, Admiral," the officer explained quickly. "The planet has abundant water, diverse biological material for our food processing facilities, and the humans themselves are physically compatible with our labor requirements. Our assessment gives them a threat rating of nearly 0. The admiral walked closer to the holographic Earth, studying it the way a predator studies prey that does not know it is being watched. He had seen thousands of worlds like this one, filled with creatures who thought they were special, who believed their small achievements meant something, in a universe that had seen empires rise and fall like waves on an endless ocean. "How long would conquest take?" he asked. 6 hours, Admiral. Perhaps less if they surrender quickly, which our psychological profiles suggest they will. Humans appear to have strong survival instincts and a history of submitting to superior force. The admiral turned to face the High Council, 12 ancient Vrethani who sat in elevated chairs around the edge of the bridge. They were the rulers of the Dominion, the ones who made the final decisions about which worlds would be harvested and which would be left alone for later. "Council members," he addressed them formally, "I present Earth as our next target. The conquest will be swift, the rewards will be substantial, and the risk is essentially nothing. Do I have your approval to proceed?" The council members looked at each other, their expressions impossible to read for anyone who did not know Vrethani customs. But the admiral had served them for 200 years, and he could see their agreement in the subtle movements of their mandibles. "You have our approval," the eldest council member declared. "Mobilize the harvest fleets. Earth will be the 4037th world to join our dominion." Across 12 star systems the message went out through subspace communications that traveled faster than light. Billions of Vrethani soldiers began preparing their weapons and boarding their transport ships. Processing facilities powered up their machines and made ready for the flood of resources and slaves that would soon arrive. The Dominion was a machine that had been running for 10,000 years, and it did not know how to stop. It only knew how to consume, to grow, to spread across the galaxy like a fire that feeds on everything it touches. In the planning rooms of the Eternal Silence, military strategists drew up their invasion plans with the casual confidence of beings who had never known defeat. They assigned fleet positions and bombardment coordinates. They calculated how many humans would be taken for labor and how many would be processed for biological material. They discussed the operation as if they were planning a harvest of crops rather than the destruction of a civilization. The humans have a global communication network, one strategist noted. We should disable it in the first wave to prevent coordinated resistance. Agreed, another replied. Also target their military command centers and their primitive nuclear weapons. We do not want any unpleasant surprises, even from such a weak species. Admiral Kethvor approved the plans with barely a glance. He had more important things to think about, like the celebration that would follow another successful conquest, and the honors he would receive from the Council. But protocol demanded that they follow the ancient rules of the Dominion, rules that had been established in the early days of expansion. Before any conquest, a formal declaration had to be sent, giving the target species a chance to surrender peacefully. It was a formality, nothing more. In 4,000 conquests, not a single species had ever managed to resist, and their surrender or defiance made no difference to the outcome. A subspace beacon was launched toward Earth's solar system, positioning itself near the largest gas giant, where its signal could reach the entire system. It broadcast on every frequency the Dominion had ever encountered, speaking in mathematical patterns that any intelligent species could decode. The message was simple. Surrender your world, submit to Dominion rule, and some of you will be allowed to live. Resist, and you will all die. The Admiral expected silence from the humans. Most primitive species did not even have the technology to detect subspace communications, let alone respond to them. Or perhaps the humans would send desperate pleas for mercy, begging for their lives in messages that would be ignored. He retired to his quarters to rest, confident that when he woke, the invasion would proceed exactly as planned. He was wrong. 3 days later, the response came, and it was something no one in the Dominion had ever expected, something that would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about the small blue planet and the strange creatures who lived upon it. The humans had heard the message, and they had something to say in return. The alarm woke Admiral Kethvor from a dreamless sleep, its harsh tone cutting through the silence of his private quarters like a blade through flesh. He rose quickly, his forearms reaching for his uniform, as his mind tried to understand what could possibly be wrong. Admiral, to the bridge immediately, the voice of his communications officer crackled through the speaker system. We have received a response from Earth. He moved through the corridors of the eternal silence with long strides, his confusion growing with every step. A response from Earth should not have been possible, not from a species that had barely figured out how to leave their own planet. Perhaps their beacon had malfunctioned, or perhaps some other species had intercepted the message and decided to interfere. The bridge was in chaos when he arrived, officers running between stations and voices overlapping, as everyone tried to understand what was happening. The holographic display at the center of the room showed Earth again. But now there were new readings, new data streams that made no sense. Silence, the Admiral commanded, and the room went quiet immediately. Someone tell me what is happening. The communications officer stepped forward, her face pale with something the Admiral had never seen in a Vrethani before. Fear. Admiral, 3 days ago we sent our declaration to Earth, she began, her voice shaking slightly. We expected no response, or perhaps a primitive radio transmission if they somehow detected our signal. Instead, we received this. She gestured toward the display, and a recording began to play. The message was not in any human language. It was in perfect galactic standard, the official language of the Dominion and the 1,000 species that served it. It was impossible for humans to know this language. Absolutely impossible. And yet the voice that spoke was clearly human. To the Vrethani Dominion and all observers, the message began, and the Admiral felt his blood turn cold at the calm confidence in those words. "We acknowledge your declaration. We have been aware of your expansion for some time. We have watched you consume the Pelori, the Drath, the mindful collective of Yit 7. We did not intervene. That was our mistake, and we will carry that shame." The bridge was completely silent now, every officer frozen in place as they listened to words that should not exist. "However, we must clarify a misunderstanding in your assessment," the human voice continued. "Earth is not humanity's homeworld. Earth is humanity's prison. 8 billion of us were placed here 12,000 years ago after the last war. A war you have no record of because we ensured no record survived. We were sealed here to forget what we were, to become something gentler." Admiral Kethvor gripped the railing in front of him so hard that the metal bent beneath his fingers. "Your beacon has broken the seal," the message said, and now there was something different in the voice, something ancient and terrible lurking beneath the calm surface. "We remember now." The recording paused for 3 heartbeats, and in that silence, the Admiral could hear the fear spreading through his crew like a disease. "You have 6 of your standard days to withdraw from this galactic arm. This is not a negotiation. This is not a warning. This is a courtesy we are extending once, in memory of who we hope to become." The final words of the message fell upon the bridge like stones dropping into still water. There will not be a second message. The recording ended, but nobody moved. The Admiral stood perfectly still, his mind racing through possibilities and finding only dead ends and darkness. "This is a trick," he said finally, forcing confidence into his voice that he did not feel. "The humans are primitive. They cannot possibly know galactic standard. Some other species must be playing games with us." "Admiral," another officer spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "The message was not only sent to us, it was broadcast on every frequency we monitor, on channels we did not even know existed. Every species in this sector of the galaxy has received it." "That changes nothing," the Admiral insisted. "We are the Dominion. We have conquered 4,000 worlds. We do not retreat because of words." But even as he spoke, he could see doubt spreading through his crew. These were soldiers who had fought in dozens of campaigns, who had watched civilizations fall before them, and now they were afraid of a single message from a planet they had dismissed as insignificant. "Find out everything about this war they mentioned," he ordered. "Search every database, every archive, every ancient record we possess. If humanity truly fought some great war 12,000 years ago, there must be evidence somewhere." The officers scrambled to obey, grateful for something to do besides stand in terrified silence. The Admiral returned to his quarters, but he did not sleep. He stood before his private terminal and began his own search through the classified files that only he could access. For hours he found nothing, and he began to believe that the message truly was some elaborate deception. But then, buried deep in archives that predated the Dominion itself, he found fragments. References to a species called the Unchained, written in languages so old that the translation programs struggled to interpret them. Warnings carved into the surfaces of dead moons, warnings that had been dismissed as primitive superstition. And then, the records from the Hollow Expanse. The Hollow Expanse was a region of space where no intelligent life existed, a vast emptiness that stretched across thousands of light years. The Dominion had always assumed it was simply a natural phenomenon, a quirk of galactic geography. But the ancient records told a different story. 14 species had once lived in that region, 14 advanced civilizations with technology that made the current Dominion look like children with toys. They had formed an alliance against a common enemy, pooling their resources and their knowledge to fight a war they believed they could win. The enemy had been humanity. The war had lasted 11 years, and the records became increasingly difficult to read as they progressed, corrupted and fragmented, as if someone had deliberately tried to destroy them. But the conclusion was clear enough. Humanity had won in 9 years. The remaining 2 years had been dedicated to something the records called correction, though what exactly that meant was not explained. But the result was obvious in the empty stars of the hollow expanse. 14 species, gone. Thousands of worlds, silent. An entire region of the galaxy, emptied of all intelligent life. And then humanity had simply vanished, leaving behind only warnings and fear. The Admiral stared at the records until his eyes burned, and for the first time in his long life, he understood what it felt like to be prey. Outside his quarters, he could already hear the chaos beginning, as the message spread through the fleet. Within hours, it would reach every corner of the Dominion, and then every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had sent their reply, and the universe would never be the same. The message spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass, jumping from ship to ship and world to world faster than anyone could contain it. Within hours, every major civilization knew what humanity had said, and panic followed close behind. On the Dominion homeworld of Reth Prime, the High Council gathered in emergency session for the first time in 300 years. The 12 ancient rulers sat in their elevated chambers, but the confidence they usually displayed was nowhere to be found. Instead, they argued and accused each other like frightened children. "This is your fault," the eldest council member shouted at his colleagues, his voice cracking with age and fear. "You approved the invasion without proper research. You chose Earth without understanding what we were touching. No one could have known," another defended himself, though his words carried little conviction. The humans showed no signs of advanced technology. They seemed primitive in every way. "And now we learn they were primitive on purpose," a third member added bitterly. "They chose to be weak. They chose to forget. And we have reminded them of what they truly are." Beyond the Dominion, other species reacted in their own ways, and none of those ways brought comfort to the Vrethani. The Nethru Consortium had served the Dominion as vassals for 2,000 years, providing soldiers and ships whenever the conquest fleets required support. They had been loyal and obedient for as long as anyone could remember. But within a day of receiving humanity's message, they cut all communications with the Dominion and began building defensive stations at the edges of their territory. When Dominion ambassadors demanded an explanation, the Nethru response was simple and terrifying. "We are not fortifying against you," the Nethru leader explained through a heavily encrypted channel. "We are fortifying against Earth, and we suggest you do the same, because nothing in this galaxy can protect you from what is coming." The merchants of Kelos, who controlled the trade routes that kept the Dominion's economy functioning, withdrew their fleets without any explanation at all. They simply left, abandoning stations and contracts and partnerships that had existed for centuries. When they finally sent a message, it contained only 7 words. "We will not profit from extinction events." Species that had been enemies for generations suddenly found common ground in their shared terror. Ancient wars were put on hold, as civilizations that had fought each other for millennia began sharing information about humanity, searching their oldest records for any hint of what to expect. What they found only made things worse. The Korvathi had legends about beings of light who had walked among their ancestors, teaching them agriculture and astronomy before vanishing into the stars. Those legends now took on a darker meaning when the beings were described as looking exactly like humans. The Drell Collective had built their entire civilization around a sacred text that warned against waking the sleepers beyond the silent stars. For generations, they had interpreted this as a religious metaphor, but now they realized it might have been a literal warning. Even the Vrethani themselves discovered troubling connections in their own history. Their homeworld contained ruins that predated their recorded civilization by thousands of years. Ruins they had always assumed were left by some long-dead alien species. but the architecture matched nothing in the galaxy, except structures found on Earth itself. The implications were impossible to ignore. Humanity had not just fought one war 12,000 years ago. They had shaped the entire galaxy, influencing countless species before retreating to their prison world. On the bridge of the eternal silence, Admiral Kethfor watched his empire crumble in real time. Reports flooded in from every sector, each one worse than the last. Vassal states declaring independence, allies demanding the Dominion withdraw its threat against Earth, military commanders refusing to advance toward the human system. "We still have the largest fleet in the galaxy," his tactical officer argued, desperation clear in his voice. "We could attack Earth before they have time to rebuild their old technology. Surely they cannot be ready to fight us after sleeping for 12,000 years." "And if you are wrong," the Admiral replied, his voice heavy with exhaustion, "if they are already ready, what then?" "Then we die fighting instead of cowering," the officer shot back. "Is that not preferable to this shame?" The Admiral did not answer immediately. He walked to the great window at the front of the bridge and stared out at the stars that had always seemed so conquerable, so full of possibilities for expansion and glory. "I have served the Dominion for 200 years, he said quietly. "I have watched civilizations beg for mercy and received none. I have ordered the deaths of billions without losing sleep. I believed we were the greatest power this galaxy had ever seen." He turned back to face his crew, and they saw something in his eyes they had never seen before. "But I have also studied the records now, the ancient fragments that describe what humanity did to the hollow expanse. 14 species united against them with technology beyond anything we possess, and humanity destroyed them all in less than a decade. Not just defeated them, destroyed them. Erased them so completely that the region remains empty to this day." The tactical officer opened his mouth to argue, but the Admiral silenced him with a gesture. "We conquered 4,000 worlds because none of them had the power to stop us," he continued. "But humanity is different. They did not avoid conquest because they were weak. They avoided it because they did not want to remember what they could do. And now, because of our arrogance, they remember. Outside the Dominion, smaller species began fleeing their home systems entirely, loading their populations onto whatever ships they could find, and heading for the farthest edges of the galaxy. They did not know if distance would save them, but they knew that staying near Earth was suicide. Religious movements sprang up overnight, some preaching that humanity's awakening was divine punishment for the sins of the galaxy, others claiming that the humans were gods, returning to judge their creation. Chaos spread as quickly as the fear that fed it. And on Earth itself, 8 billion humans began to change in ways that no one outside their world could see or understand. The seal was broken. The memories were returning. And the 6 days of courtesy that humanity had offered were already beginning to count down. The change began with dreams that felt too real to be imagination. Across every continent on Earth, people woke in the middle of the night with tears streaming down their faces and memories that did not belong to them. Farmers in China dreamed of commanding fleets that sailed between stars. Children in Brazil spoke equations in their sleep that their parents could not understand. Old women in Russia hummed songs in languages that had not been spoken for 12,000 years. Dr. Yuna Okonkwo was a neuroscientist working at a research hospital in Lagos when the first reports began flooding in. Patients were arriving with strange symptoms, claiming they could suddenly understand mathematics they had never studied, or remember places they had never visited. The emergency rooms were overflowing with people who thought they were losing their minds. "I do not understand what I am seeing," Yuna said to her colleague as she studied brain scans on her computer screen. "These neural pathways have always existed in the human brain, but we thought they were evolutionary remnants, leftovers from our ancient past that serve no purpose anymore. And now, her colleague asked. Now they are activating, Yuna replied, her voice filled with wonder and fear. Every human being on this planet is experiencing the same phenomenon. Dormant sections of our brains are waking up, and they contain information that should not be there. She pulled up more scans, comparing them to baseline readings from just a week before. The difference was impossible to ignore. Areas of the brain that had shown minimal activity were now lighting up like cities at night, processing information at speeds that human science had never measured. It is as if our DNA contained a hidden library, she explained. Generations of knowledge encoded in our genetic material, waiting for something to unlock it. And that something has arrived. Outside the hospital, the city of Lagos was transforming. Traffic had stopped, not because of accidents or protests, but because everyone had simply pulled over to the side of the road, sitting in their vehicles with distant looks in their eyes, as memories that were not their own flooded through their consciousness. A taxi driver named Emmanuel sat behind his wheel and watched visions of ancient battles play across his mind. He saw ships that moved without engines, weapons that bent light itself, and humans who walked between stars as easily as he walked between rooms. The memories were not his, but they felt true in a way that nothing else in his life ever had. He whispered to himself, "We built the gates," though he did not know what gates he meant. We connected the worlds before there were words for worlds. Similar scenes played out in every city on Earth. Construction stopped, as workers suddenly understood engineering principles that had taken humanity's greatest minds centuries to discover. Hospitals fell silent, as patients and doctors alike sat in meditation, processing the flood of ancestral knowledge. Schools emptied, as children realized they already knew everything their teachers could have taught them, and so much more. The process was not painful, but it was overwhelming. Some people laughed as they remembered, while others wept for joys and sorrows that had happened 12,000 years before they were born. Families gathered together and shared memories they had never experienced, finding connections that transcended their individual lives. Governments tried to maintain order at first, but they quickly realized that the old structures of power were meaningless now. What authority could a president or prime minister claim over a population that suddenly remembered building civilizations that spanned galaxies? What laws could constrain beings who had once reshaped stars themselves? On the third day of the remembering, the first councils began forming spontaneously. Humans gathered in groups not based on nationality or language, but on the skills they were rediscovering. Engineers met with engineers, healers with healers, navigators with navigators. They organized without conflict, moving together with a unity of purpose that would have seemed impossible just days before. "We are one again," an old man said, in a gathering of thousands in New Delhi. "We sealed ourselves away to forget, to escape the weight of what we had done. But we cannot hide from who we are any longer. The only question now is what we will choose to become." By the fourth day, construction had begun. Factories around the world retooled their machines, guided by knowledge that their operators had possessed since birth, but only now could access. Resources moved freely between nations without negotiation or payment, because everyone understood that borders were meaningless in the face of what was coming. The ships rose from the surface on the fifth day, and they were beautiful in a terrible way. They were not built for war, though they could fight if they needed to. They were archives, living records of everything humanity had been before they chose to forget. Each archive carried the complete history of human expansion through the cosmos, the rise and fall of civilizations they had created and destroyed, the wars they had won and the species they had erased. They broadcast this information openly, sending it to every corner of the galaxy so that everyone would know what humanity could do. In the eternal silence, Admiral Kethvor watched the broadcasts with growing horror. The records showed battles fought across dimensions that the Vrethani did not even know existed. They showed weapons that made his most powerful ships look like toys. They showed humanity not as conquerors seeking power, but as something far worse. Beings who simply removed obstacles and felt nothing while doing it. They are not angry, he realized aloud, and his voice shook with the implications. They are not vengeful or cruel. They simply do what needs to be done without emotion or hesitation. That is why the hollow expanse is empty. They did not kill those species in passion. They killed them because those species stood in their way. On Earth, Yuna Okonkwo stood on the roof of her hospital and watched an archive ship rise into the evening sky. The sight was magnificent and terrifying, and she felt tears running down her cheeks as memories of other ships from other ages played through her awakened mind. We were good once, she whispered to the stars. We were protectors and teachers and healers. But then we were hurt, and we learned to hurt back. And we forgot how to stop. She remembered the decision to build the prison, to seal themselves away on a single world and let the memories fade. She remembered the hope that future generations would be free from the burden of their ancestors. And she remembered the sadness of those who knew the seal would not last forever. The sixth day dawned clear and bright over the small blue world that was no longer a cage. Humanity was awake, and the galaxy held its breath. Admiral Kethfor stood on the observation deck of the Eternal Silence and watched his empire die without a single weapon being fired. The great dominion that had conquered 4,000 worlds was collapsing like a house built on sand, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The vassal states had declared independence within hours of viewing the archive broadcasts. Species that had served the Vrethani for generations suddenly remembered that they had only submitted out of fear, and now there was something far more terrifying than the Dominion demanding their attention. Military commanders across the fleet were abandoning their posts, ignoring orders, turning their ships toward the edges of the galaxy in desperate attempts to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Earth. The great harvest fleets that had been preparing to invade sat motionless in staging areas, their crews refusing to advance towards certain destruction. We have received no response to our communications, the communications officer reported, her voice hollow with exhaustion. Our allies will not answer. Our vassals have blocked our frequencies. Even the neutral trading partners have gone silent. The admiral did not reply. He simply stared at the stars and thought about all the worlds he had helped destroy, all the species he had watched beg for mercy that never came. He had believed the Dominion was eternal, that nothing could stand against their might. Now he understood how foolish that belief had been. They had been predators, yes, but they had only preyed on the weak. They had never faced anything truly dangerous. And now that something truly dangerous had awakened, they had no idea what to do. On the seventh day, a single vessel entered Vrethani space. It was small, barely larger than a diplomatic shuttle, and it carried no visible weapons. The design was elegant and simple, looking almost primitive compared to the massive warships of the Dominion fleet. But every sensor that scanned it reported impossible readings, energy signatures that defied the known laws of physics. They are requesting permission to approach, the communications officer announced. They wish to speak with the High Council. Admiral Kethfor looked at the 12 council members who had gathered on his ship, the ancient rulers who had approved the invasion of Earth and set all of this in motion. They sat in their elevated chairs, but they no longer looked like the masters of an empire. They looked like frightened old men waiting to learn their fate. "Grant them permission," the eldest council member said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We have no choice but to hear what they have to say." The human vessel docked with the Eternal Silence, and a delegation of Vrethani officers went to greet the ambassador. They returned minutes later, with a single human walking among them, and the bridge fell absolutely silent as everyone turned to look. She was old, far older than any human the Vrethani had ever seen in their records. Her hair was white, and her face was lined with years of experience. but her eyes were what captured attention, ancient eyes that held a weight and weariness that seemed to stretch across millennia. "Thank you for receiving me," she said, and her voice was gentle in a way that somehow made everything worse. "My name is Dr. Yuna Okonkwo, and I speak for the people of Earth." "You speak for a species of murderers," one of the council members spat, finding courage in his fear. "We have seen your archives. We know what you did to the hollow expanse. You are monsters pretending to be civilized." The human ambassador smiled, but there was no happiness in the expression. It was the smile of someone who had heard the same accusation 1,000 times and had stopped arguing against it. "You are correct," she agreed softly. "We are monsters, or at least we were. The archive records do not lie. We destroyed 14 species completely, erased them from existence so thoroughly that even their memory vanished from the galaxy. We did this because they attacked us first. But that does not excuse what we became in the process of defending ourselves." She paused and looked around the bridge at the terrified officers and the trembling council members. "We imprisoned ourselves because we could not bear what we had become," she continued. "We sealed away our memories and our technology and our power, hoping that future generations would grow into something better. We wanted to be farmers and artists and teachers. We wanted to raise children who would never know the taste of blood between the stars." Admiral Kethvor stepped forward, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "If you wanted peace, why did you respond to our beacon?" he asked. "Why not simply remain hidden?" The ambassador turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that he never expected: pity. "Our ancestors designed the prison well, but they could not account for every possibility. Your declaration of war triggered something deep in our genetic memory, something that could not be ignored. We woke because you made us wake." "So this is our fault?" the eldest council member said bitterly. "No," the ambassador replied, shaking her head slowly. "This is simply what happened. Blame serves no purpose now. The only question that matters is what comes next." She reached into her simple robe and withdrew a small device, placing it on the table in front of the council. "We are leaving," she announced, "returning to Earth, sealing ourselves away again if we can. We will try to build a new prison, a new cage for our memories. We will try to forget once more, and hope that the next version of humanity will succeed where we failed." "And if we try to stop you?" Admiral Kethvor asked, though he already knew the answer. The ambassador did not respond with threats or warnings. She simply looked at him with those ancient, tired eyes. "You will not try to stop us," she said quietly. "You have seen the archives. You know what we can do. You will let us go, because letting us go is the only choice that allows your species to survive." She turned to leave, then paused at the door and looked back over her shoulder. "We will be watching," she added, "not to threaten, but to protect. If another species threatens Earth, if anyone tries to wake us again, we will remember, and this time we might not be able to find our way back to sleep." The bridge remained silent long after she departed. The small human vessel detached from the eternal silence and began its journey back toward the distant yellow star where Earth orbited. No one tried to stop it. No one even considered the possibility. In the weeks that followed, the Dominion collapsed entirely. Without the fear of Rethani conquest holding it together, the empire dissolved into dozens of independent states. The great harvest fleets were decommissioned, their weapons stripped, and their hulls repurposed for peaceful trade. The age of galactic conquest was over. On Earth, 8 billion humans began the long process of forgetting. They dismantled the archive ships and buried the technology that had built them. They erased records and destroyed artifacts. They did everything they could to return to the simple life they had been living before the Vrethani beacon arrived. But some memories could not be erased completely. Some knowledge had sunk too deep into their blood and bones, and every night, humans across the world dreamed of stars and battles, and the terrible weight of power they hoped they would never have to use again. The galaxy remained silent, watching the small blue planet with a mixture of fear and gratitude. They feared what humanity could become if awakened again, but they were grateful that humanity had chosen peace, had chosen to return to their cage rather than remake the universe in their image. And in the darkness between stars, the hollow expanse remained empty, a monument to what happens when the sleeping giants of the cosmos are forced to open their eyes. The message humanity had sent echoed through the centuries that followed, passed down through generations, as the most important lesson the galaxy had ever learned. Let the humans sleep. Let them dream their peaceful dreams. And whatever you do, never give them a reason to remember.